It was a humid evening in 1955 when Evelyn Johnson boarded the number 7 bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She had just finished another long day sewing uniforms at the textile mill, her hands sore, her feet aching from hours of standing. The streets outside the bus window were still bustling, the warm glow of streetlights mingling with the fading sun. Inside the bus, the air felt thick, heavy with sweat and exhaustion, and even heavier with something else, unspoken rules that weighed on every black passenger. Evelyn sat near the middle, in the first row of seats marked for colored passengers. She clutched her purse tightly, her mind half on the chores awaiting her at home and half on the rising tension she had seen all around town. She had grown used to the quiet humiliations of segregation, separate water fountains, separate schools, and buses that treated black riders like second-class citizens. But this evening, something inside her felt different, though she could not yet name it. The bus rolled forward, stopping frequently to pick up passengers. At each stop, white passengers climbed aboard, filling their designated section at the front. Soon, the bus was crowded. As the driver glanced back and scowled, Evelyn knew what was coming. It was the unspoken ritual. When the front seats filled, black passengers were expected to give up their places and stand. The law did not require it, but the custom was enforced ruthlessly. As the driver stopped and a few more white passengers boarded, Evelyn felt his eyes burn into her back. Everyone else in her row stood and shuffled to the aisle, but Evelyn remained seated. Her body ached from work, but her stillness had little to do with exhaustion. It came from something deeper, an invisible well of dignity and quiet defiance. She did not move. The driver shouted his demand. Passengers began to whisper nervously. Some black riders looked at her with fear, silently pleading with her to stand and avoid trouble. The white passengers looked at her with disdain, disbelief that she would dare break the unwritten rule. But Evelyn remained still. Her hands gripped her purse, her heart beat faster, but she refused to surrender her seat. The driver's face turned red, his anger rising like a storm about to break. The tension became unbearable. The driver stopped the bus and stepped off, heading for the nearest police patrol. The entire bus sat in stunned silence. Evelyn stared out the window, her eyes fixed on the street beyond, but her mind was racing. She had not planned to make a stand tonight. She had not planned to become a symbol. Yet, here she was, in the middle of a storm she could not escape. As the sound of approaching police sirens echoed in the distance, a strange calm washed over her. Something deep inside told her that this moment mattered, that this small act of refusal might ripple far beyond this bus. And when the police stepped aboard, the world for Evelyn Johnson was about to change forever. The police boarded the bus with authority, their heavy boots thudding against the metal steps. They stood over Evelyn, demanding that she move. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the officers and the young woman who sat motionless. The air in the bus was tense, charged with fear. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she refused to stand. Within moments, the officers grabbed her arms and pulled her to her feet. Her purse swung to the floor as they led her off the bus. Some riders looked away, unable to watch. Others followed with their eyes, unsure if they were witnessing an act of foolish defiance or something far more important. News of Evelyn's arrest spread through the neighborhood quickly. That evening, whispers traveled from porches to kitchens, from church meetings to barbershops. Many knew Evelyn as the quiet seamstress who kept to herself, never causing trouble. Yet now her name was being spoken with awe. The police booked her at the station, treating her like a criminal. She was fined and held overnight, enduring the humiliation of segregation in the jailhouse. But as she sat in the cell, she began to think not about her fear, but about her purpose. The injustice she had endured was not new. What was new was her refusal to quietly accept it. Outside the jail, community leaders began to take notice. Pastors and activists gathered, discussing what had happened. They saw in Evelyn's small act of resistance a spark that could ignite something greater. Many had been waiting for the right moment to challenge the bus segregation system, and now they wondered if this was it. By morning, Evelyn was released, her body tired, but her spirit unbroken. As she stepped out of the jailhouse, the sight waiting for her made her stop. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, church friends, workers from the mill. They were not protesting yet, but their faces carried something new: hope. The whispers of her arrest had become more than gossip. They had become a call to action. Evelyn did not know it yet, but her life and the life of her community would never be the same. And as she walked home under the hot Alabama sun, plans were already being made in church basements and community halls. The days following Evelyn's arrest were filled with restless energy across Montgomery. In black neighborhoods, conversations turned to her act of defiance. People who had long endured humiliation on buses began to ask a dangerous question: what if we all refused? Local pastors called meetings, gathering citizens in packed church halls. The mood was electric. Many feared retaliation. Others feared losing their jobs. But Evelyn's courage had pierced through their fear. They began discussing a boycott of the bus system. If the buses depended on black riders for profit, what would happen if they stopped riding? Evelyn herself remained quiet in the background. She never sought fame, but the leaders understood the power of her story. They spoke of her as an example, a symbol of dignity. Her refusal to stand was not just a single act, it was a challenge to an entire system of injustice. The first flyers went out quietly, passed hand to hand, urging people to avoid the buses on Monday. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Workers arranged carpools, church vans were organized, and some prepared to walk miles to their jobs. The bus company dismissed the rumors. They believed the boycott would fail, that people would return after one day. But Monday came, and the buses rolled down the streets nearly empty. Drivers stared out at the sidewalks, where hundreds of black men and women walked together in the cold morning air. Evelyn watched from her porch as neighbors passed, heading to work on foot. Their steps were steady, their faces determined. She felt a strange mix of pride and fear. The retaliation from those in power would be harsh, but the movement had begun, and there was no turning back. By evening, news of the boycott spread beyond Montgomery. Reporters began to take interest. What started as a quiet protest was becoming a national story. And those who had dismissed Evelyn's act as meaningless began to realize that something much larger had been set in motion. With the boycott gaining momentum, the backlash came swiftly. White city leaders grew furious as bus revenues dropped. They called meetings, pressured employers to fire black workers, and threatened violence. Evelyn, though not a leader, became a target. Her name and face were printed in local papers, often with hateful commentary. She began receiving threats at night. Strange cars idled outside her home. The fear weighed heavily on her, but she refused to leave town. Across the community, intimidation was rampant. Churches were bombed. Leaders were arrested on false charges. Employers warned their black workers that participating in the boycott could cost them their jobs. Despite this, the movement held firm. People walked in rain and cold. Carpools grew more organized. The sense of solidarity deepened. National attention intensified, with journalists arriving to cover the story. What started as a quiet protest was becoming a symbol of resistance across America. Yet the struggle took its toll. Evelyn often wondered if she had done the right thing. She had wanted dignity, not chaos. But each time she saw her neighbors walking to work, refusing to bow to injustice, she knew the fight was bigger than her own fears. The tension in Montgomery was reaching a breaking point. Something had to give.
As the boycott dragged on, the legal battle over bus segregation moved into the courts. Lawyers argued that the laws forcing black riders to sit separately were unconstitutional. The case gained national attention, with reporters and civil rights groups watching closely. Evelyn was called to testify about her arrest. In the courtroom, she described what happened on the bus, her voice steady despite the hostile stares. Her simple words carried enormous weight. She spoke not just for herself, but for every person who had endured humiliation. Outside the courthouse, the community waited anxiously. Tensions were high, rumors of violence swirled, yet hope persisted. After months of hearings and appeals, the ruling finally came. Bus segregation laws were struck down as unconstitutional. The news spread like wildfire. People wept with joy. Evelyn sat quietly on her porch, overwhelmed. She had never imagined that refusing to stand on a bus could lead to this moment. But even as the community celebrated, she knew the struggle was not over. Segregation was deeply rooted. Dismantling it would take years. Still, the victory mattered. It was a beacon showing what ordinary people could achieve when they refused to bow to injustice. And for Evelyn, it was the moment she fully understood the power of one quiet act of defiance. The boycott ended after more than a year. Buses were desegregated, and black riders sat where they wished. Evelyn boarded the bus again for the first time since her arrest. She sat near the front, the same place she had once been dragged from. The driver said nothing. Other passengers barely glanced at her. It seemed ordinary, but Evelyn knew it was anything but. It was the result of countless steps walked, countless threats endured, and countless acts of quiet courage. As the years passed, her story became part of a larger history. Others would rise and continue the struggle for equality. Evelyn remained humble, never seeking credit, but her refusal to stand remained an example for future generations. In later years, young people would hear her story and understand that change often begins with a single moment of courage. Her act had shown that racism thrived when people stayed silent, and that dignity could topple injustice when people stood, or in Evelyn's case, sat for what was right. The world was far from perfect, but the ripples of that single night in 1955 spread far beyond Montgomery. And as the bus rolled on under the Alabama sun, Evelyn gazed out the window, knowing she had not just taken the last seat on the bus, she had taken the first step toward a better future.